vegetables, water, timing, heat at certain frequencies. Your mind is going around all that, and then a whole concept is formed. You call it a pot of soup that is palatable, that is edible. Concepts. Are you with me? So, what this helps to do is that it helps you to stretch and believe that anything that can be achieved can actually be achieved. So that if you're pursuing a goal and you get to a place that you get stuck, all you need to do is reconceptualize the process and you will find the gateway. Are you with me? If you are pursuing a plan and it looks as if you get stuck somewhere, beyond prayers, reconceptualize the whole process and you will find the path out of where you are stuck. This is how scientists, right, they can pursue something again and again, like Thomas Edison. He kept trying, this one will not work, change the formula, change the formula. What he was doing is that he was reconceptualizing the process. He didn't necessarily change the components. Maybe at some point he changed the components, but the predominant principle in creating or innovating something is a reconceptualization of the entire process of how things are formed over and over again. That reconceptualization is the key. Hallelujah. So, a thought, notion, idea, imagination roaming around, picking puzzles together and coming to be interpreted. So let's look at conceptualization. How concepts are formed in the soul. That's just what I've been explaining. How concepts, you see, somebody sat down and began to imagine the neurons. And then they took it and began to draw a nervous system in biology textbooks. And people studied it and believed it. And then they took it now and put into AI. And then now advanced into machine learning. So one concept expanded over time. They reconceptualize and reconceptualize, and it becomes advanced. And then people believe it, and it works because of the principle of conceptualization or reconceptualization. So just take one idea that you've conceived, conceptualize it. Over time, you reconceptualize it, it becomes advanced. And then as your mind is developing, you can reconceptualize that one idea over and over and over again, because the creations of God have endless abilities. So you just give, that's why somebody will write a book, like Brian Tracy talked about how he wrote books. He will write a book. Every chapter in that book, he will take it and make a book out of that chapter. 2-3 years later, he will pick those chapters from those books and make chapters out of those books. He just keeps reconceptualizing. And that's how the knowledge keeps expanding. And then they'll say he had written 100 and something books. Meanwhile, he just started with 12 chapters in one book. And from there begins to expand and expand. Are you with me? What is that? The principle of nature, the tree. Branches, branches, branches. The branches bring fruits. The fruits fall and bring more branches. And bring more roots, stem, branches that now bring seed that fall and bring. Simple principle. So God buried the concept of conceptualization and reconceptualization in the very fabric of how creation is meant to multiply, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. Are you with me? Whew. The way or manner in which notions are formed in the mind. Now, this one is deep. The way or manner. When you say God is light, how do you get convinced in your mind that the light that the Bible means is the one you are seeing? That what I just said now will make your imagination to begin to travel on journeys into endless realms of reason. Endless realms of reason. Trying to think, trying to stretch, to be able to form a notion. As your soul is going through those places, trying to form notions, thought concepts begin to be embedded in your soul. What I'm saying, I understand, but I hope you understand. But if you don't understand, listen to it, this message again, and meditate over it. Because there is a reason why the most respected people on earth are thinkers. People that think. Because if you don't stretch your mind, you will stifle your potential. There are people who pray for 5 hours, 6 hours in tongues, but they can't sit down and think for long. And if you find it difficult to sit down and think for 2 hours, you may not be able to accomplish much. Thinking, you have the mind of Christ. So, in thinking, you need to stretch, because the way you gain, the way your creative abilities in God are awakened is by stretching the thoughts. What we call our mind, the membrane of our mind. You know what I call membrane? The substance that forms our mind. The more you stretch it, the more its capacity to contain concepts. So if you don't stretch it, it cannot contain concepts. That's why people who only think survival, they will be pushing wheelbarrow. The ones who sit down and think will make automated mobile systems that can move by the pressing of a button. Do you understand? One person believing, Uzo, carry wheelbarrow, as they are coming, people are jumping up and down. One person will sit down and stretch the mind and create something that you press a button and it will convey heavier goods than a truck can carry from place to place. Are you with me? It's a simple principle. Until we come to that point where we raise a generation of thinkers. Listen, the Greeks were thinkers. And any civilization that rises will always adopt things from the Greeks. Even those who came to Egypt and studied, when the Greeks came, they refused to give Egypt the credit. They were giving the Greeks credit. Why? Because the Greeks were thinkers. Because the principle of stretching your mind gives you access to the unlimited possibilities that God had hidden in the fabric of the soul, in the membrane of the soul. There are things that God hid inside the mind that God said, except you stretch it to certain levels, they will not come out. So you will not know it's there until you stretch. That's why sometimes God allows people to go hungry. Because sometimes when you are in the place of lack, and then you've made calls and tried to self-help, and nothing works, then you will now go and lock yourself somewhere. And then you pray and meditate and think, and then one light will just come. Now, the light didn't come from heaven today. The light had come, is in your spirit. But most of the time, your mind hasn't been stretched enough to accommodate the interpretation of that kind of light. There are some kind of light, revelation, that for it to come, the mind has to be stretched to a certain frequency. And I know something, hunger makes the mind to stretch. I know that. Hunger makes the mind to stretch. Sometimes. Not the kind of hunger that kills, but the kind of hunger that almost kills. So, it will stretch your mind. And then when that light drops, it will now make meaning, interpretation. When that interpretation comes, that solution you derive from that thought, that interpretation forms a concept that infuses into you a possibility mentality that the challenge is already solved, even though the challenge has not been solved. That confidence that comes from that light that you have received that tells you that this challenge I have been thinking about so much is going to be solved. That confidence, inherent in that potent confidence, is a concept that carries the capacity to bet the solution. I'm going very deep now. I need to stretch. These things are, you see, the people who are inventing and innovating, they are not better than you. The mind just needs to stretch a little further. The way or manner in which notions are formed, as you begin to stretch, you begin to think, is this the one? Is this the one? Could this be the answer to what I'm looking for? Your mind begins to pick and pick and pick. Then when the answer comes as light, a concept rests, and then you conceptualize it. Okay, so this is the solution to my challenge. And then between when you conceptualize it and the materialization, that mind that has been expanded extracts the value content from there and interprets it to your circumstance. What do I use? Let's say, you know a GP tank. I have looked at GP tank. That's one of the things that have sold the most in this world. GP tank, cement. These things will sell till Jesus comes. People are buying GP tanks. You have a house, you must put GP tank. Even if you don't dig a borehole, you get water from water board, you must put a GP tank because you want to store water. And so, now, somebody conceptualized it. First, it was bucket. Then it was normal butter, the one our parents used to use, from clay pots, and I made butter. But where does the concept of all of this come from? River and streams that can hold water. So somebody look at river and streams and say, okay, how can I take a stream and go and keep in my house? And then the mind began to stretch. How do I take a stream that can contain 5,000 liters of water, like this one, and go and keep in my house? How do I keep it to make it pure? To reduce the ability for fungi and all manner of bacteria to just have easy access by reason of the penetration of the ultraviolet rays of the sun. Okay. We can make a container. The container has to be black. That's why GP tanks, their predominant color is black. Because it shields some things. So that the water doesn't boil. And a couple of other things inside. So they began to conceptualize it. Okay. We can make it such that, and then if we keep it, okay. So for those of them who are building story buildings, what do? They began to build those rafts. You see, that's what I talked about earlier. Inside one concept are several other concepts. As your mind is stretching, it's expanding. One idea will bet several ideas. Those several ideas will bet several ideas. And as long as you can give it economic value, by interpreting it to be able to meet the needs of mankind, you gain access to resources. Are you with me? So the challenge is that sometimes you need to let go what you have to be able to access what is more valuable. Sometimes you need to leave your comfort zone to be able to assess what is needed. Yes. And that's because deep calleth unto deep. And there are times when you cannot afford some distractions. So, in the midst of all the chaotic nature of life, the hustle and bustle, you need to make out times of thinking. We need thinkers in Africa. We have too many people who went to school, and when they talk, all they talk is what they learned in school, and it's not working. Because we have had successive governments with questionable certificates. And like attracts like. Did you notice that Buhari, they said he did not have a certificate? He said he had, but he didn't bring it out. Tinubu, he said he had. The thing was in disparity. One day the thing just died. Something happened behind the scenes. Now, is that bad though? But even the ones that have certificates, if you don't have wisdom in today's world, there are a lot of things I can tell you. Today we are seeing migrant crisis into Europe and all those places. And they say, oh, migrants, we need to bring them in. Do you know that somebody wrote a script? A man named George Soros in 2015 wrote a script that nations of Europe and America should be destroyed. So if we don't have thinkers who can bring solutions to stem some kind of crisis, we don't know the scripts they've written concerning Africa that will start playing out in the next few years, because they are saying that Africa is rising. Because these men are sitting down somewhere and designing things. Who are the solution bearers that will be able to, by an innovative wisdom, reconceptualize defense mechanisms, either from that which has already been established, innovate on them, or completely be inspired by some new concepts from God to be able to stem the tide of the calamities that will come against Africa. Because once any nation begins to rise, enemies will rise against that nation and against that continent. So we are saying Africa should rise, Africa should rise. Are we thinking of how we are going to sustain the influence when it comes? That's why I'm talking to you people. Because there are people who have to start thinking. 7 years from now, Africa, because listen, we know that the influence of God over Europe has left them. It's just a matter of time. So those people are not going to live without a fight. Their leaders will not be able to imagine that Africans will now become the light. People that we've enslaved for centuries will now have light that they will say no. Many people are going to enter into arrangements with very dark entities to see how they can bring down the destruction of Africa, bring about the destruction of Africa. Who are the people that are going to rise up and say no? Not by fighting them, but by innovating concepts of wisdom into practical manifestations, such that it will be interpreted as technology, it will be interpreted as whatever, physical. They will use, secular vocabularies to interpret them. But the intention remains that it is a defense mechanism against enemy forces. Who are the people who are going to bet this thing? Because I know it will come. Study the history of civilizations. While you are rising, there are people who are sitting down there plotting your downfall. That's because the world system works on survival of the fittest. If this one is going up, pulling down to rise, pulling down to rise. That's how they operate. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Misconception. Missing the way a particular thought or notion was supposed to be conceptualized. Conceptualization, misconceptualization or misconception. But I prefer misconceptualization actually. You miss the concept. You began to conceptualize things the way you were not supposed to conceptualize them. You began to accommodate thoughts converse to the positive way it's supposed to be interpreted. Taking things out of context. Somebody says something, and because of the way your soul has been postured, you interpret it out of context and begin to run with it and try to convince yourself that the way you interpret it is correct. There are people like that. You are in error, but sometimes because of ego, pride, lack of the ability to be meek, you say no. It's just the way I want it. You cannot be deceiving yourself and telling yourself that you are correct. And every day you wake up, your mind says, but you know that you are going to crash. And then fools will now start going to pastors for prayer. That's where it's always bad. Because somehow people think that you can just scatter. And then somehow the magicians call pastors, they will just package everything. And that's why I tell people, yes, if you make mistakes, God helps you arrange some things great, but avoid the ones you can avoid. Especially things that has to do with the soul. Because you see, you can have injury here, and you put GV and iodine, right? 1 week, everything arranges itself. But the one that's inside, you can be smiling and you are dying inside. Hey, how are you? Oh, fine and all that. Somebody said, I cannot marry this kind of men. And guess what? The way this life is very funny. Those are the kind of men that will be coming. Now, you don't even know why you made that statement. Why you took on that posture that you cannot marry this kind of man. It may just have been something you heard. Now, the way you heard it, maybe that's not what the person meant. But there was already a friction or a damage in your soul at the point when you were receiving that information. So there was a damage, and then the person came with some kind of interpretation and did not create balance. And when that information fell on a damaged soul, it further helps you to misconceptualize the concept of marriage. Or the concept of scientists. Some people say it's not good to go to school. No. It's not good to be a slave of the educational system. But the aspect of going to school for expansion of knowledge, so that you can interact with the social worldview, so that if you are going to influence them tomorrow, you already understand how they think is good. Are you with me? So, but if you don't have that balance, you will say, why am I going to school? The idea is, let the knowledge of the education systems not control you. Let wisdom in you help you control the knowledge of those systems. Because like I said earlier, those systems can be erroneous. The way the pool of knowledge in the world is. If you just bring any thesis, anybody can accept anything. Many of the things that we accept were a result of scripts that were written to deceive mankind out of order. And they took time to articulate knowledge in certain ways and use professors in higher institutions that were widely respected globally to shape those knowledge paradigms as if it is truth, meanwhile it is error. Today they are saying immigration laws, immigration laws, immigration laws. Accept migrants, accept migrants. Then they cause crisis in those nations and make migrants to run. I saw a video of UN officials coordinating with Hamas. A drone captured them. And then Hamas were staying inside UN office in Gaza to be committing havoc to Israel. And yet UN is saying, Israel ceasefire, Israel ceasefire. The same UN is working with Hamas. Imagine the kind of complex system we are in. So if you listen to their news, you'll be confused. Except you investigate and know what they are doing. The whole idea is cause chaos and scatter everything. Let nations and individuals not rise to their full potential. And the people who wrote these scripts, they have influenced educational structures and institutions of curriculum development such that they have formed things in the minds of people that professors have taken to come and teach people. And it's been widely accepted. So guess what? Many things you're learning in school are in error. Are you with me? Now, I did business management. They still teach till tomorrow in business management that when you want to start business, get a loan. What they don't tell you is that at the macroeconomic level, loans devalue the economy of a nation. And when your currency is devalued and you're not producing anything, it imposes hardship on the economy of the country. Now, Nigeria is suffering today, but they have been teaching collect loan in business management for more than 20, 30 years. So the nation has been collecting loan. But they did not teach you innovate with the resources you have that would have boosted our economy. They will not allow you to teach that one in formal school. Why? If they teach you that, it means that you will no longer be a slave of the Western systems. So they won't teach you that. So you have misconceptualized harnessing resources for the purpose of establishing economic systems. You have missed the concept. Using money to start business is good, but they help you to misconceptualize it by introducing that loan is a good scheme. They tell you it mitigates risk. The risk is not on you. The risk is shared. It's all manner of nonsense they taught us. Rubbish. When you come out and sit with wisdom, and wisdom begins to teach you in the inward parts, you begin to understand that, your lecturer was possessed by evil spirits. in a polished way. Those spirits, the ones that wear tie and suits, that speak good English, those are the ones that possess them. That's the kind of world we live in. If you follow that system, you will end up on a rocking chair like your grandfather. Maybe better. I must tell you, it's good to know the system. In other words, if God says you should go to school, to understand their weapon, because education is the weapon of, formal education system is the weapon of the West against Africa. That is the greatest tool of colonization of the West against Africa is education and religion, these two. That's why they first brought religion, and then those religious systems began to bring secondary schools, and they'll tell you missionary schools, they take you and go. And then they just teach you information that will keep your potential at a certain level to continually be enslaved to them. Are you with me? And they'll keep churning out things. And then they make your leaders not to believe in you. The day I meet Prince Otu, I'll tell him, can we create a system, a setup that is to work with pure innovators outside of Ministry of Wealth Creation, to work with innovators, a kind of outside the box kind of agency that will work with young innovators who are inventing new things, and then government and private partners should be called to fund them, and then they can bring professionals and vocational teachers to come together and see how they can expand these ideas. But they won't think like that, because all they'll think about is, oh, free education. They don't even check the education that they are teaching these children in primary school. Is it still relevant in today's world? They don't check. They don't check. But when they say free education, they feel that they have done the right thing. And that's because wisdom does not communicate to the masses. Wisdom is for a few. So the kind of wisdom that teaches you what will make you influential will not be coming from government house. It will be coming from well-structured circles. See, wisdom is everywhere but does not manifest everywhere. Because not everybody is ready for wisdom. Even if the government today said they want to do this kind of thing, many people will oppose it because many people are driven by their sensual appetite and their stomach. They will oppose it. That's why wisdom cannot manifest everywhere. A disorderly interpretation of, not all, a disorderly interpretation of a matter, notion, or reality. When you are interpreting something in a disorderly manner, what do I mean by disorderly manner? That is not the way it ought to be interpreted. Knowledge was not meant to be a tool to create class in society where some people are higher than some. Knowledge was supposed to be a tool that will make those who have gone ahead to inspire the upcoming ones to come up. But in Africa, because of the damaged souls from the memory of slave trade, when people go higher in knowledge, all they think about is how to create class. Sit behind tinted vehicles and oppress the rest. Build houses and build high fences. Because a slave will always think of how to overprotect what he has from his own brothers. And of course, I don't mean every African, but I mean those who have refused to be renewed. Rather than opening their hands and saying, see, I've seen this come. People say, but they will destroy you. If you don't integrate with them, how will you help them not to be destroyers? One day they will pull down that big fence. You see, now, if you like, build a fence that is as tall as Aso Rock. They will use AI and cyber security to penetrate your walls. So you don't have a choice. If you're not going to help the people will destroy you. Because I will shake the heavens and the earth. God is scattering everything. So that everything can be reinterpreted back to order. Even in the midst of elements of disorder, global elements of disorder, like the name I mentioned earlier. A disorderly interpretation of matter, notion of reality, of a matter, notion of reality. Everything that you think about, always ask yourself, am I thinking about it the way it ought to be thought about? Never assume that you are correct until proven by revelation. Never assume you are correct on any matter until it is proven by revelation. If not, where you assume that you are correct, you will most likely become a slave of error. What do I mean by slave of error? It will be difficult for you to be corrected because you have already accepted your assumption. That's where meekness comes in. One of the most dangerous things is assumptions that are not founded on truth. The extent of damage that has done, most times you don't know it until you get to a place of influence, and then you open your mouth and speak in public, and your foolishness, the throne of that foolishness finds expression on such a massive scale that it will take a decade to repair. That's why one of the scriptures I like about Solomon, he said, let your words be few. As you grow and begin to connect with a lot of people, you realize that it's important that your words are few. We may want to look up that scripture so that we don't. Proverbs. Ecclesiastes rather, 5 verse 2. Be not rash with your mouth, and let not your heart be hasty to utter anything before God. He didn't even say before man, no. Before God. He said, for God is in heaven and you upon the earth. Therefore, let your words be few. What does it mean by God is in heaven and you upon the earth? The earth is so small compared to the vastness of heaven, and heaven is the storage of all wisdom and knowledge. So whatever you know from this realm is so limited. So be careful. It's so limited. The earth is just one planet among 9 planets in the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy alone has so many things, and there are several millions of galaxies. So can you imagine now thinking that what you know is everything? Except it comes from heaven, and you can verify it by the one who created all the galaxies. Be careful. Say, God is in heaven above, you on the earth. Let your words be few. All right, next slide. Are we still here or are we gone? Okay, so let's look at the nature of concepts. The nature of concepts. Remember, we're talking about how to calibrate your perspective. But you cannot calibrate perspectives without understanding concepts, because concepts are what we use to calibrate perspectives. By the way, I should have defined this earlier. To calibrate something means to rearrange it in such a way that you are able to optimize its value according to the integrity of its structure. It means that something is not functioning the way it ought to function by reason of either overuse or by reason of being used wrongly. And so you are trying to realign it according to the integrity of its originality to optimize its value. By reason of the things that we have been taught, by reason of our associations, by reason of our upbringing, by reason of our faulty religious indoctrinations. And even when we get righteous knowledge, we go out and entangle, mix with other people, and so there are mixtures everywhere. So by reason of this, there is need to be recalibrated, but at the realm of how concepts are formed in your soul, so that you can now optimize the value of your life. So that you can now, you see, you get to a point where you begin to understand that in life it's about drawing the balance. How do I draw the balance when my hopes and aspirations, the skills I'm learning, my desire about what I'm supposed to become, the nature of my relationships, the way favor comes to me, how do I posture such that I can always be in alignment that all of these things together are working towards the advancement of my person and the quality of my life? In other words, how do I walk in a way that I don't fall into a trap of short-circuiting my destiny by going for something that is good and forsaking the best by reason of ignorance? It has to do with how you conceptualize life. Your concept of life, right? The nature of concepts. So, concepts generate perceptions from which inform our perspective. What are perceptions? Perceptions is how we think or understand things, while perspective is how we view things. Now, perceptions inform perspective. How you think and understand things determines how you see things. If you see, I'll use gender parity for instance. If you see women as the jihadists see women, they see women as things to just use, they put to bed and dump them, don't go to school, you are just good to stay in the house. You will kill the potential of them. You will just, if you think about them like that, then you cannot see any good thing coming out of them. If you are a victim of a marriage or a family where your father was beating your mother or your mother was always fighting your father,